Now, once I've done that, I need to get some shadows below these wheels, but I also have to get this wheel back into the right spot. So I'm actually going to come around here, and this is obviously too low, at least visually. So in this case, I'm going to get my lasso tool, and I'm going to use a polygon lasso tool, because this is a pretty straight area right here. I'm just going to click, and then I'll click here, then right over here, and then now I can just go all the way around this whole big area here. Let me zoom out of it a little bit until I finish it. Right there. Oops. Right there. Now, I'm going to go ahead and go to Select, Modify, and I'm going to feather this by 1/2 pixel, again, because I want a soft edge between that. Get on my layer with the plane, and I'm going to copy this, or actually I'm going to cut it, Command X, or go to Edit, Cut. Now I'll go to Edit, Paste, or Command V. And that's going to put it in a different spot, but I'm going to grab that layer and drag it down below here, bring it over to kind of where the shadow is, so it's in the same place, and I can adjust that a little bit so that perspective-wise it's working just a little bit better. It's a little bit higher than the other, and so that will work. Size-wise it's okay because we know it's farther away from us. It was just too low at that point. I want to maybe just check my shadow, make sure that it's in the right spot. If it's coming out clear down here, it's going to be a little bit farther forward, but I think we can get away with it by making that and bringing that in there. Now, one of the ways we can also make this recede is to come in and paint a little bit more shadow over it. What I'll do is I'm going to push the Command key and click on Layer 3 that has that. And now I'm going to come back up to the shadow layer that I had that's in Multiply. I'm just going to add a little bit more color to it. I'm going to drop my opacity just a little bit more. So it'll darken that up a little bit and let that recede just a little bit more so it doesn't quite come out as far. And I think actually maybe this one needs to be a little bit darker here as well. So I'm going to darken that up just a little bit. Okay. Alright, so that's working out pretty well, and I know that that wheel is in the right spot, so I'm going to go ahead and just go to this layer and merge down so that I've got this space here available to me. And I'm saving my memory here. Finally, the last thing I'm probably going to do in this is I've got to create a shadow. Now there are two different shadows that I have to be concerned about. One is directly below the wheels where they're coming in contact, and then one is just an overall shadow right through here. And I can do both of those, but I have to do them on different layers. The first one I'm going to do is the one right underneath the wheels. I'm going to create this. Now I want to move it down here so that I can see better where it's going to be painted. I'll come in here, and because my shadow is going at this angle, I want to make sure that I'm getting the angles also correctly there. So what I'll do is get a smaller brush, and I'm going to go ahead and just paint like this. Let me get a little higher opacity too. And I'll get a little darker color as well. So I'm going to push my Option and get the eyedropper. I can just come in here now and paint this kind of like that. Okay, now at this point I'm going to go ahead and go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and I'm going to blur that shadow a little bit. You can see what's happening right here. Okay, then the next thing I'm going to do is go to Filter, Blur, Motion Blur, and what this will do is stretch. You can see what it's doing right there. It's going to stretch that shadow a little bit and give the sense that it's closer right here, but as it fades away from that image or gives away from that image, it's going to diffuse. So it will stretch that just a little bit, and then I'll have kind of this darker shadow area right below the wheel, which is where I want it. Okay. Now I've got that. I don't have to do that every time. So, and I don't want to, these are going to be cast at a little different shadow because they're a little different angle. And so I'm going to just select this, and I'll push my Command and Option key and drag this, and it will duplicate it over underneath this other tire. Now I'll go to Edit, Transform, and I'm going to distort it just a little bit. Looks like this is coming just a little more like that, and it's also going to be just a little bit smaller because it's farther away, so we've got to adjust for that. I'll hit Return, and then I'll finally take this here, and I'll push Option and Command, and I'm going to duplicate this, bring it to this wheel. In this case, I'll go to Edit, Transform, Distort again, and I'm going to distort this and make it quite a bit smaller to be able to fit. The funny thing is that this is, I can't put it on a shadow right here because then this shadow is farther forward than this. The sense is that this plane is going to be taking off, or it's up in the air a little bit. Part of it is the angle that I've got. Maybe I need to rotate the plane a little bit, which I can do, and we'll see what happens. So maybe hearing some voices in the background. I tried to get people to be quiet, but they didn't do it. So yeah, I'm going to rotate this plane forward a little bit so that front wheel is resting a little bit. So I'll select on that plane, go to Edit, Transform, and I'm going to rotate this just a little bit like that. So, do I like that? No, I actually think I like it better taking off a little bit. That seems a little, it's just a little more interesting to me. It's not very real. It's not necessarily super realistic, but it's sort of that way. Now this one right here, I want to do the same thing. Where it's closer here, I need to get a little darker shadow, but I'm going to work on that later. What I've got to do now, first of all, in this shadow, is change it from normal to multiply, and it will darken up that area. Maybe a little too dark, so I'm going to lighten that up just a little bit. You see if we lighten it up a lot versus just a little bit, like that. Then I'm going to create another layer, and this layer is going to be for the plane. Okay, so I'm going to select this area, and I've got a couple things. Hold on a second. Let's do this. I have two things that I have to be concerned about. One is the angle of the plane this way, which is going to cast a different type of shadow than the angle of the plane this way. These are farther away from the ground, and so they're going to cast less shadow than this. Also, one thing to be aware of is that with the shadow, and I've kind of messed up a little bit right here, this shadow needs to be back just a little bit because it's a cast shadow. See, this shadow right here, this is going to be coming back here. The closer these are to the ground, the closer they're going to be to the wheel. But here, because we're quite a ways away, we're going to see that shadow actually coming back here. So I'm going to create two different shadows, one for the plane and one for this. And where they cross, it's going to be a little heavier color, which is typical and normal. So it's not going to be really that unusual. It's going to seem right. First of all, let's see. Let's make sure that I'm on my correct layer. I'm going to make the shadow for the wings. And I think that feels a little far forward, so I'll start back here actually. Go right here, and then come out to about right here maybe. Make it a little bit more broad. Maybe sort of like this. Okay, now I'm going to go, in this case, I'll just get my brush, really big. I'm just going to go in and paint it all. I'll push deselect. Now that seems about right. Now we're going to have to make some adjustments here and there. But I'll go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. And we're going to blur it quite a bit because it's really quite a ways away from that now. And hit OK. Alright. Now we're going to go to Filter, Blur, Motion Blur. And we're going to get this to come back just a little bit more, maybe like that. Okay, so we've got the shadow. Let's change this from normal to multiply. That's going to darken that up. Let's just hit tab for a second and see how it's looking. That's okay. This seems a little strong to me, and I can erase some of that later, so I'm not too worried about it. Okay. Now we need to do this shadow that's right here. So let me get back to our layers. I'm going to create a new shadow, or a new layer. And I probably ought to be naming all these just so that I can keep track of them, but in an image that's this simple, it's not that big of a deal yet. Now I'm going to start here, and then I'm going to come, it's fairly narrow here, then it gets a little bit wider, kind of right here where the wings are, and the engine in that area here. I don't know what that's called, the prop and that, all that stuff. And we'll add a little bit of that to it. Now, this doesn't have to be totally accurate. It just has to give a representation of what we have going on so that it's convincing. And that's all that really matters, is that it's convincing. And as long as that works, then we're going to be fine. And I think it will. So let's go in and paint all this. Okay, deselect, Command D. Now go filter, blur, Gaussian blur. I'm going to blur this a little bit here. That may be a little too much. Put it right there. Hit OK. Now filter, blur, motion blur. There. And we want to do it at the angle that this plane is at. So we'll get that and we'll stretch that out a little bit as well. Now this area right here needs to be a little darker. So what I'm going to do at this point is come in here with my lasso tool again, the magic or the polygon one, and select around this area right there. Now if I just come in and paint this, I can get a really hard edge. But what I want to do instead is go to Select, Modify, Feather. And I'm going to feather this by 20 pixels or so. Actually, that's too much. It's going to tell me I don't have enough space. So I'm going to go Select, Modify, Feather by 10 pixels. There we go. Now, with that, I'm going to come in and just paint this part right here. I'll push hide so that you can see that this is the area that's getting a little extra paint in it. That's maybe too much. I gotta see what I'm doing here. I'm going to come back in here, start painting. Now I'll hide it. Paint that so it's a little darker back there, but then it's going to fade off as it gets farther away. And I'll paint with a little lower opacity. Right now I'm painting at 70%. Maybe I'll paint at 30% here and then 10% as it goes up. So it will gradually fade off.
Okay, Mr. iPad.
And push deselect so that's gone. That looks pretty good. If it's a little bit strong, I can always get my eraser and just come in with like 10% and just erase a little bit of that so that we're not completely dark there. Make that a little bit softer. Maybe this part make a little bit darker right through here. So I'll paint this at about 10% as well. And let's see how it looks. So that's pretty good. The colors are working because I took it kind of the same day. One thing I can do is probably come in here with a little bit of red reflection in here so that we see some of that color and it kind of harmonizes it with what's behind it. I hope you understood this, and good luck.